It's not easy to talk about this. Even now, when those memories surface, I taste metal in my mouth, a bitter blend of shame, guilt, and a doubt that refuses to fade. I've been practicing medicine for over 2 decades. Today, I teach at a university hospital here in São Paulo, a place that sees everything, from routine cases to patients in judicial custody, usually brought in under armed escort after some medical emergency. We have an entire ICU wing reserved exclusively for these cases. It sits in the back of the old building, with separate access, everything more controlled, more isolated from the rest of the hospital world. Anyone who's worked in a place like this knows the cases are complicated, often arriving without proper medical records. Sometimes a patient has already passed through other facilities, spent hours without evaluation, missed critical treatment windows. Because of this, it's not uncommon for some not to make it, unfortunately. And perhaps that's why it took us so long to notice what was happening right in front of us. Perhaps we had grown too comfortable with the idea that some cases are simply lost causes, that death is just an inevitable part of this particular corner of medicine. But there's a profound difference between accepting fate and ignoring a pattern, between surrendering to the natural course of illness and turning away from something darker. Back then, I shared shifts with several colleagues, but one stood out. Let's call him M. He was an older physician, already carrying about 30 years of experience, and he was the kind of man who was difficult to read. Rational to an almost unsettling extreme. He was never friendly, but he was never rude either. He kept everything at the bare minimum necessary. If 3 words could explain something, he used 2. If someone praised him, he ignored it. If someone criticized, he corrected without emotion. But nobody could say he wasn't competent. Nobody could question his technical skill or his knowledge of protocols. He was the type of professional who knew the rule book inside and out, understood exactly what could and couldn't be done. And he repeated one phrase frequently, like a mantra. Our function is to keep the living alive, not to manufacture survival. At the time, I thought it was just his way of summarizing ICU logic, that we weren't there to prolong suffering, that we needed to know when to stop fighting. But today, I hear that phrase differently. Today, those words carry a weight I wasn't ready to understand back then. What began to draw attention were the coincidences piling up like bodies in a morgue. Whenever a patient arrived under escort, in custody, and the attending physician happened to be, the outcome was always the same. Patient did not survive. Sometimes they weren't even critical cases. There was one who came in with severe dehydration, another with a fractured rib being monitored, but showing no lung injury. 1 or 2 had a history of illicit substance use, but generally the situation appeared stable, or at least treatable with standard interventions. But they never lasted. They always deteriorated with sudden, unexpected decline, a respiratory arrest that wouldn't reverse, an inexplicable drop in blood pressure, a metabolic collapse despite adequate support and everything we threw at them. In the official reports, everything was technically defensible. Refractory instability, aggravated clinical condition, unresponsive to intensive therapy, conservative management given reserved prognosis. Nothing sounded out of the ordinary to anyone who only read the paperwork. But paper doesn't feel what we feel inside that room. Paper doesn't capture the silence that settles when something feels wrong, but nobody dares name it. One day a colleague mentioned to me, almost like venting, trying to laugh off his own unease. Funny thing, with them the prisoners never leave. We already start counting them as losses before they even arrive. In that moment I laughed and he laughed too. But something uncomfortable hung in the air between us. Something neither of us was willing to name or confront. But from that point forward, I started paying attention. I began reviewing old charts, old notes, going back through cases I'd barely remembered. I saw that every single custody death over the past 2 years shared something in common. Same clinical presentation, same type of decision-making, same doctor signing the death certificate. That's when, sometime later, something happened that turned the key in a lock I didn't know existed. A nursing technician, one of the veterans who'd seen everything this hospital had to offer, pulled me aside to talk. His voice was caught somewhere in his throat. He couldn't speak directly, kept his eyes fixed on the floor the entire time, like he was confessing a sin. He told me he'd worked a shift with M 2 nights before. The patient was a young man, maybe 20-something years old, who'd arrived with a chest wound, nothing severe. It hadn't punctured the lung, had already been drained in the emergency room. He was being monitored, sedated, but stable according to every vital sign we track. The entire team was occupied with an emergency in another bed, chaos pulling everyone's attention away. And M stayed alone in the prisoner's room under the pretense of evaluating the central line access. The technician said he came back to get some equipment and happened to pass by the glass partition. He didn't enter, but he saw. He says M adjusted the infusion pump, that he disconnected it, then waited. The alarm sounded, and M silenced it with a casual press of a button. After that, he just stood there, watching the monitor like he was waiting for something, not calling anyone, not doing anything to intervene. 10 minutes later, the patient went into cardiac arrest. They tried to resuscitate him, did everything by the book, followed every protocol. M conducted the protocol with precision, following every step exactly as trained, but there was no response. The death certificate was issued the next day, evolved with sudden hemodynamic deterioration. The technician didn't know what to do with what he'd witnessed. He said he stood frozen for several minutes, trying to understand if he'd really seen what he thought he saw, trying to convince himself his eyes had deceived him. He couldn't affirm anything with certainty. There were no cameras in that room, no other colleague to confirm his account. But he also couldn't forget what he'd witnessed through that glass partition. The next day, he filed an anonymous complaint. He didn't deliver it directly to the hospital administration, but left it with a retired professor who was close to the board and whose integrity was beyond question. What happened after that unfolded quickly, faster than I expected, but at the same time it was far too discreet, far too quiet for what had potentially occurred. The board opened an internal investigation. There was no General Zhao, no alarm raised. They only called in those who were on the registered shifts and demanded absolute confidentiality. They cross-referenced medical records from the past 8 years, conducted a thorough analysis of deaths among patients in custody, and then the pattern emerged, screaming from the data. 13 deaths, all occurring during M's shifts. Not one with a report of technical error. Not one contested at the time by anyone who reviewed them. But when you looked with a magnifying glass, when you really examined the details, you could see it clearly. In every single case, the fatal outcome was preceded by minimal but cumulative decisions. Interruptions of life support before the ideal time. Conservative approaches even in reversible conditions, reduction of monitoring in patients who were still unstable, small choices that when added together made all the difference between life and death. But on paper, everything followed the parameters perfectly. He never violated a direct rule, never left a poorly written note, never forgot a stamp, a time notation, a prescription detail, and perhaps that's exactly why no one ever suspected, or perhaps no one wanted to suspect someone so respected, so technically proficient, so seemingly beyond reproach. The official conclusion of the investigation was deliberately vague, carefully worded to protect the institution. They cited protocol breaches, indications of irregular conduct, possible emotional exhaustion affecting judgment. He was removed from duty. There was no formal trial, nothing in the internal bulletin, no public statement, no explanation offered to the staff, who had worked alongside him for years. They simply stopped scheduling his name on the roster. He vanished from the schedule, vanished from conversations, as if he'd never existed at all. A month later, he requested early retirement. He left without ceremony, without farewell, without anyone daring to ask the questions that burned in everyone's mind. A strange silence settled over the hospital after that, a kind of moral vacuum, as if everyone had understood what had happened. But nobody knew what to say about it. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak the unspeakable truth out loud. I remember the following week, walking into the wing where he used to work. I passed by the prescription room and saw his chair sitting empty. And as ridiculous as it might seem, I stood there staring at that chair for what felt like forever, trying to understand how someone could do that, how a healer could become something else entirely, or worse. How we let it continue for so long, how we failed to see what was right in front of us. Because the truth is, he was admired, respected, had authority that went unquestioned, and we trusted him. We trusted him so completely that we never looked twice, never questioned his judgment, never second-guessed his decisions. And when someone did question, there was always a ready explanation waiting. The patient already arrived unstable. The prognosis was poor from the start. The response to treatment was weak. Or most commonly, there wasn't much that could be done anyway. These phrases became mantras that absolved us all. But now, looking back with eyes finally opened, the feeling is entirely different, the weight unbearable. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped seeing them clearly, stopped questioning what should have been questioned? It seems he decided in silence who deserved an attempt at life and who did not deserve that chance. It seems absurd to think this way, to believe a doctor could make such calculations, but there were 13 cases, all in custody, all without family, all with criminal records, and apparently all treated by someone who didn't believe they were worth the effort of trying to save. I can't affirm anything with absolute certainty, and I don't want to, but there's something that haunts me relentlessly, keeps me awake some nights. The complete absence of any ethical mark on his professional record. No warnings, no previous investigations, nothing that would have raised a red flag to anyone reviewing his credentials. If someone were to research him today, they'd find a professional with 30 years of impeccable career, a clean curriculum, and academic praise from colleagues and institutions. But if they pulled the medical records, if they looked at the names, the dates, the causes of death, they would see what I finally saw. The deaths speak for him louder than any testimony could. Write in the comments a statement beginning with, "I recognize that," about a time when you trusted someone's authority without questioning, when you saw patterns but remained silent. Sharing this acknowledgement isn't about guilt. It's about understanding how easily we can become complicit through our silence. How trust without vigilance can enable the unthinkable. I don't know how his life ended. I don't know if he feels remorse. I don't know if he believes he did the right thing. If in his mind he was simply being practical, efficient, rational. I only know that he used to say, "Our function is to keep the living alive." And perhaps in his mind, some people were already dead the moment they arrived in custody, already beyond redemption, already not worth the resources or the effort. And maybe, just maybe, I'm still trying to understand if the error was his alone or ours collectively, because we saw it. Maybe not with our eyes, but we saw it in the data, in the patterns, in the coldness of the medical reports, in the silence of his decisions. And we did nothing to stop it. We trusted him. We trusted him so much that we let him decide alone who deserved the chance to live. Sometimes the monster in the story isn't the one in handcuffs. It's the one with access to the medication, the one wearing the white coat, the one we never thought to question. I remember it was Thursday night because my mother had left early and my brother didn't want to spend another overnight there. He said Friday was going to be a full day at work. We'd been taking turns since my father entered the ICU the previous Saturday. He went in as a precaution, that's what they told us. His heart had given us a scare, but it had stabilized quickly. Intensive monitoring, nothing more than that. I believed it myself those first days, even though I couldn't go inside, only seeing him there during visiting hours. Intubated, sedated. I thought it was just a matter of time before he came home. But after 3 nights in that same corridor, pacing the same worn path in the linoleum, I began to understand that nobody passes through the ICU for something minor. The reception area of the isolated wing was dim at night. Just a weak lamp near the coffee machine, and some emergency lights scattered along the walls, casting long shadows. There was an upholstered bench in the corner, the kind that sinks too deep when you sit. Your body seems to disappear into it, like you're being swallowed by exhaustion and fear. And there was that frosted glass separating us from the world inside, from the place where life and death waged their nightly battles. During the day, you couldn't see anything through it. But at night, with the lights inside stronger than the ones in the corridor, the glass became a mirror. Distorted, dirty, smudged with fingerprints and breath, but still a mirror nonetheless. And that's where I spent hours watching, searching for signs, for hope, for any indication of what was happening to my father. I couldn't see him directly, but I could see shadows, the movement from within, the silhouette of someone changing sheets, the reflection of monitor lights blinking their coded messages, sometimes a hand lifting his arm slowly, carefully, things like that. Small glimpses into a world I couldn't enter. That night I was alone. The footsteps of the technicians had already diminished to almost nothing. There was a nurse who occasionally passed by pushing some equipment, never making eye contact with me. It seemed like those of us waiting outside didn't even exist, as if our presence somehow interfered with their work, disturbed the clinical efficiency they needed to maintain. And I understand, they're exhausted, working impossible hours under unbearable pressure, but still, one word would have been enough, just one acknowledgement that we were human beings waiting for news of someone we loved. It was around 3 in the morning when I started noticing something strange in the reflection, something that made my stomach drop. First, there was movement, faster than usual. Someone entered with urgency. Then 2 more people rushed in behind them. One of them appeared to climb onto the gurney, positioning themselves above my father's body. And then I saw the movements. Rapid, firm, direct. A rhythm I recognized immediately, even though I'd only seen it in television dramas. Compressions, resuscitation. They were trying to bring him back, and I was sitting there with my breath trapped in my throat, watching through the reflection in dirty glass, watching my father die and be brought back in shadow form. There was no sound, none at all, only the silhouettes moving in the glass, the gloved hands pushing down, the arms pressing with mechanical regularity, the shadows around the bed becoming more agitated, more frantic. Someone was gesturing wildly. Another was adjusting something beside the gurney, everything in a desperate, muted chaos that I could only witness as silent cinema. Time moved slowly in that moment, stretching each second into an eternity. I can't tell you how long it lasted, how many minutes I sat frozen, watching the dance of death and resurrection played out in reflection. It could have been 5 minutes, could have been 15, but I couldn't blink. Couldn't look away even for a second. I knew it was him in there. I felt it in my bones, in the way a daughter knows her father's presence even in shadow. And then everything stopped. The arms lowered slowly, heavily. One of the silhouettes removed their gloves, let them fall into a metal tray with a sound I couldn't hear, but somehow felt. Another pressed their hands against their lower back and stood there, bent over in defeat or exhaustion or both. A third person stood facing the monitor, and the light that had been blinking disappeared. In the reflection, the glow vanished, and it was right there that I understood there would be no more movement, no more attempts, no more hope. One of the doctors exited through the door, walked straight past me without lifting his head, moved like it was just another routine shift ending. And perhaps it was for him. Perhaps death had become so commonplace that it no longer registered as anything remarkable. I stayed there. I didn't cry, didn't chase after anyone. I just kept staring at the glass, waiting for someone to come tell me what I already knew in the deepest part of myself. And it took forever. It took an unbearably long time. The coffee machine made noise when someone used it, but that night it remained mute, as silent as everything else. The bench sank deeper every time I tried to adjust my body, trying to find a position that didn't hurt, that didn't feel like surrender. And the ICU door only opened again when the clock already showed a little past 4 in the morning. A woman from the nursing staff emerged. I don't remember her face, only the way she said it, the rehearsed gentleness that couldn't mask the routine nature of her delivery. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. I just nodded my head, spoke quietly, barely above a whisper. I know. I didn't ask any questions, not to her, not to anyone who came after. Didn't request the exact time, didn't ask for an explanation, didn't want to know what happened before or after, because for me, it had been over for a long time already. And it wasn't over when they told me. It was over when the hands stopped moving, when the reflection became empty, when everything fell silent inside that room behind the glass. Deep down, I think they knew I had seen everything, knew I'd been there since early evening, knew that the glass showed more than it should have, but nobody wanted to confront that reality. Nobody asked if I was okay, if I needed someone, if I wanted to call anyone for support. They left me there for 40 minutes with the knowledge of my father's death, alone with my grief and the ghost of what I'd witnessed. And what marked me most wasn't even the time. It was the way that time was filled with nothing, with the echo of technicians' shoes on linoleum, with the sound of the automatic door opening to let someone else enter, with the click of the coffee machine resetting itself automatically, as if it too was pretending everything functioned normally. There was a woman cleaning the floor with a wet cloth, moving methodically through her rounds. She cleaned near me, glanced quickly in my direction and moved straight past, as if I were just part of the furniture, just another fixture in the landscape of institutional grief. It's strange to think that someone can witness the end of a life without being noticed, without being acknowledged, without being included in the moment that matters most. I was there for him all week, keeping vigil, maintaining hope, and in the most important moment of all, I was invisible. But I saw everything through that distorted glass mirror. After that, they followed their basic protocol with mechanical precision. They called my brother, called my mother, handed over the papers, explained very little, used words that don't really say much of anything. Sudden instability, resuscitation attempts, progressive failure, everything so clean, so perfectly categorized and filed away. But what I remember most is the silence of the hour when it ended, the silence of the hour when they left me waiting alone with my knowledge, and the silence of my own head, because I also couldn't speak anymore, couldn't find words for what I'd witnessed. After that day, I changed many things about how I move through the world. I changed how I listen to news, how I read official communications, how I interpret words like stable or under observation. I began to distrust everything official, every sanitized explanation, because I understood that the problem isn't the lie. It's what they hide inside the truth, the gaps between what happened and what they're willing to tell you. My father died that early morning, but what stayed with me wasn't the pain of death itself. It was the way it arrived to me, without anyone telling me, without anyone preparing me, without anyone acknowledging what I'd seen. How many times have you known something terrible before anyone told you and been left alone with that knowledge? We grow up believing that hospitals are places of care, that people in uniforms know what to say, how to comfort, how to look you in the eyes during the worst moments of your life. But the truth is that those of us on the outside are not part of the story being written inside those walls. We're just people who wait, and sometimes we see the entire ending without ever being called in, without ever being given the dignity of acknowledgement. Later, I told this to some people searching for validation or understanding, or maybe just someone to confirm I wasn't crazy. Some said it was an exaggeration, my grief distorting reality. Others said it was just routine, the way things work in hospitals overwhelmed by death and disease. But nobody convinced me that what happened was right, that leaving a daughter to watch her father die in reflection while they took 40 minutes to deliver news she already knew was acceptable medical practice. Share in the comments a reflection beginning with, "I commit to," about honoring those moments we witness in silence, those truths we carry that others never acknowledge. Writing this commitment isn't about blame. It's about refusing to let these experiences disappear into institutional silence, about validating what we saw even when no one else wanted us to see it. Today, I still pass by hospitals and pay attention to the glass partitions, to the reflections, to the shadows moving behind frosted barriers. Sometimes I find myself wondering how many other people have seen everything through reflections like I did, without anyone noticing, without anyone caring that they witnessed something they'll never forget. I don't expect comfort anymore. I don't expect anyone to explain what they didn't want to say before. I just kept that experience, not as trauma, but as warning, as knowledge about how institutions function when they think no one is watching. Because that day, while everyone inside the ICU fulfilled what they call protocol, I was on the outside, sitting quietly, making no noise, seeing everything through the glass. The glass was frosted to protect privacy, but the reflection was crystal clear, and nobody there wanted me to see what I saw. If you've been through something similar, or know someone who lived through this type of institutional silence, comment here. There are many things that are never said, never acknowledged, but we feel them just the same, carry them in our bodies long after the moment passes. You know how overnight shifts are in emergency medicine. Nobody enters smiling, nobody arrives fresh and optimistic. Who comes in arrives badly, desperately, and who's already inside depends on us to get out alive. It was a Wednesday night, end of the month, ICU completely full, no prediction of new beds opening up anytime soon. The room where we usually gather to discuss treatment approaches wasn't even functioning properly. Ceiling light burned out, telephone crackling with static, making communication difficult. Nephrology wasn't in the hospital, only on call from home. 2 patients arrived almost simultaneously, as if fate had orchestrated this impossible choice. One was brought by the emergency room staff, already direct from the Red Room, where the most critical cases go. The other came transferred from a neighboring town, already hours into his deterioration. Both in critical condition, both with acute renal failure, neither responding to hydration, blood pressure dangerously low, signs of acidosis creeping through their systems, and only one dialysis machine available. Just one. It's not uncommon in public hospitals. We get used to it, learn to function within impossible constraints. But getting used to something isn't the same as accepting it, isn't the same as being okay with playing God. The decision needed to be quick, but it wasn't made in panic or without thought. When you learn to work with these situations, you know what to look for, what markers indicate who has a fighting chance. Level of consciousness, likelihood of reversibility, response to initial measures. The first patient was Marcos, 32 years old, no known medical history, lucid and cooperative, showing signs of fluid overload but oxygenating well. Blood pressure was borderline but responding to vasopressors. The fluid replacement was beginning to take effect, his body fighting back. EKG showed no severe abnormalities. Troponin levels were good. We believe in the body when it reacts, when it shows us it wants to live. The other was Senor Ademar, 61 years old, with comorbidities already extensively documented in his chart. Hypertension, type 2 diabetes, history of a mild stroke that had left its mark. He was barely conscious, pupils sluggish in their response, oxygen saturation poor despite our interventions. Even with maximum support, his blood pressure wouldn't sustain itself, not even with the medication running at the highest safe dosage we could administer. When the team looked at me, waiting for the decision that would determine who lived and who died, I already knew the answer. It's not who I want to save, it's who can come back. We prepared Marcos, assembled the dialysis circuit with practiced efficiency. The machine was turned on shortly after midnight, its rhythmic hum filling the space with the sound of life being filtered, cleaned, restored. He was conscious throughout, thanked us with a discreet wave, didn't even try to make conversation, just closed his eyes as if surrendering to the mercy of the machine and our hands. I went to check on Ademar immediately afterward, guilt already beginning to coil in my stomach like something living. He wasn't sleeping, but he also didn't seem present, didn't seem anchored to this world anymore. His gaze was vacant, empty, staring at nothing. Oxygen saturation was beginning to drop steadily, a slow descent toward the inevitable. We adjusted the ventilation, increased the medication dosage, did everything in our power with the limited resources we had. His heart rate became erratic, jumping and stuttering like a dying engine. 40 minutes later, he went into cardiac arrest. We performed compressions, administered epinephrine, attempted to reverse the rhythms. Everything that needed to be done was done according to every protocol we'd been trained to follow. But he didn't come back. His body had made its choice, or perhaps we'd made it for him. I signed the death certificate with a hand that felt heavier than it should have. The family was called, we talked, I gave them all the clinical details, everything within what the protocol instructs us to provide. The medical record was complete, documentation pristine, the shift continued forward. I still had other beds to monitor, other patients requiring attention, other priorities demanding my focus. But the next morning, with the day already moving at its relentless pace, they called me into the corridor. It was the social worker. She looked at me like someone who already knew she shouldn't be saying what she was about to say, that she was crossing some invisible line. She just spoke quietly, almost apologetically. Senor Ademar's daughter stopped by earlier this morning. She left a letter written by him, asked us to deliver it in case what happened happened. I took the envelope from her trembling hands. It wasn't sealed. I opened it right there in the corridor, unable to wait, unable to prepare myself. It was short, handwriting shaky but legible, the type of letter someone writes when they know they're close to leaving this world, when they need to say things they never said while there was still time. The part that stayed with me, that burned itself into my memory, was this. Forgive me for not having been a present father, and thank you to the medical team. I know you did what you could. I don't know how long I stood frozen with that paper in my hands, reading those words over and over. I returned to the doctor's lounge, but I didn't sit down, didn't open any charts, didn't do anything productive. I just stood there for a time, without moving, without touching anything, lost in the weight of what those simple words meant. It wasn't even noon yet when the same social worker appeared again, her face somehow even more troubled than before. She said the patient advocacy office had received a notification, an official document. Actually, it came from the public prosecutor's office. A communication about Marcos, the one who survived, the one I'd chosen to save. According to the document, he was answering to criminal charges, was being prosecuted for serious crimes. He had been authorized to serve house arrest with electronic monitoring, but he'd broken the ankle bracelet and disappeared from the database weeks before our shift. He was actively being sought by authorities, and he was admitted to our hospital without an escort, without any official record, without any warning to us. His medical chart said Marcos, but it didn't say anything else beyond his failing kidneys, beyond his immediate medical needs. We learn to make quick decisions in this profession. It's a part of the job nobody wants to do, but someone has to do it. Someone has to play God in the middle of the night with incomplete information. Marcos was transferred 2 days later. He was discharged from the ICU ahead of schedule, clinically stable, without complications, as if his brush with death had never happened. He barely seemed like the same person who 3 nights before was on the verge of complete renal failure. When he left a note thanking the staff for the care, wishing strength for the team, signed only with his first name, nothing more. At the time, nobody commented on it, but everyone noticed. Everyone looked at that note with eyes that held questions we couldn't voice. The document that arrived from the public prosecutor's office was brutally clear. He was a defendant in an ongoing case involving kidnapping with violence, a crime still in progress when we saved his life. He was being actively hunted by law enforcement, but he managed to receive hospital care because he was admitted without judicial identification. Just a name, age, and verbal address that nobody verified. Nobody checked his background, and nobody had time to question anything beyond his immediate medical crisis. When I found out, I didn't say anything, not to the team, not to nephrology, not to anyone who might have offered comfort or absolution. I just requested to review the technical record of the treatment from beginning to end. Everything was correct. Everything followed protocol perfectly, but that's not what stayed with me. That's not what haunts me in the quiet hours. What stayed was Senor Ademar, his letter, his absence afterward. That sensation that something inside me became wrong, became broken in a way that can't be fixed with more training or better protocols. I didn't do anything outside proper medical conduct, didn't fail to act as protocol demands. I didn't differentiate between the 2 patients in terms of technique, in terms of the medicine we practiced. But one of them had a story the medical record didn't tell, and so did the other. And what would it mean for you to make a choice with incomplete information, knowing you might never know if you chose correctly? We do not have a way to know who patients really are when they arrive at our doors in crisis. We only see what the body shows us, the blood pressure, the level of consciousness, what the blood gas analysis reveals, how the medications respond. Marcos was lucid, young, with controllable blood pressure, and Demar was deteriorating and kept getting worse. There was no way to reverse that trajectory, no medical intervention that could have changed the math. But sometimes I think, if I had waited 10 more minutes, if I had tried to increase his medication dosage just a little more, if I had... The medicine didn't fail, the protocol didn't fail, but something in me did. Something didn't come back from that shift, some piece of certainty I used to carry about doing the right thing. Leave in the comments your intention beginning with "I decide" about how you would handle impossible choices when you can't know all the information. Sharing this decision isn't about judgment. It's about acknowledging that sometimes life forces us into positions where every choice carries weight we never asked to bear, where saving one life might mean failing another. After that, I kept working normally, continuing my shifts with the same competence everyone expected. ER physicians don't have much time to dwell on old cases, to ruminate on decisions already made. But this one, I never brought it up in case discussions, never mentioned it in meetings, never shared it in groups or in corridor conversations, because it wasn't meant to be discussed. It was meant to be swallowed, digested in private silence. Deep down, I know nobody would have done differently. Marcos had a better chance, and protocol mandates saving who can return to life. But Ademar wrote me a letter, poured his heart onto paper in his final hours, and Marcos fled back into the shadows where violent men hide. If you've listened this far, thank you for hearing what I could never say out loud to anyone who knows my name. In medicine, we learn to save those with the best chance of survival, but nobody teaches us how to live with the doubt about whether we let the wrong man die, whether we extended mercy to someone who didn't deserve it while denying it to someone who did. The first thing I noticed was monitor 0413. Flat rhythm, zero output, no pulse, no pressure, no response to any stimuli. The patient had been stable until midnight, vital signs holding steady. She'd dropped her oxygen saturation slightly, but nothing outside what we'd expect given her condition. She was awake during evening rounds, answered all questions correctly, oriented to person, place and time. The nursing staff was monitoring her closely, according to standard protocol. I had done the last rounds at 0130, checked every patient, made notes, felt confident everything was under control. When they called me, I thought it would be some respiratory complication, maybe requiring adjustment of her oxygen flow, but it was a full arrest, complete asystole with no electrical activity. She was a 49-year-old woman who had entered the ICU 5 days before with secondary respiratory insufficiency from an infectious process. No severe comorbidities, lucid, independent, functional. You could have real conversations with her. She had personality, had plans for after she recovered. She had a daughter who came every single day without fail, sitting by her bedside during visiting hours, holding hope like a fragile thing. When we entered the bed bay, everyone was already in motion, moving with the choreographed urgency of a code. The technician pulling the ambu bag, the resident connecting the central line access. I went directly to compressions, didn't say anything unnecessary, just counted the time on the monitor clock, each second ticking past like an accusation. I marked the first cycle, following standard protocol, epinephrine, ventilation, compressions in closed circuit, everything by the book. No response in the first 5 minutes, not even electrical activity on the monitor, just that terrible flat line. We continued, second dose, then third, pushing medications into a body that seemed determined to slip away. By the 8th round, the resident's arms were trembling with exhaustion. I switched with her, took over for another 5 minutes of relentless compressions. The technician was sweating with the ambu bag stuck, the air dry, mask slipping despite her best efforts to maintain the seal. Around the 24-minute mark, I thought about calling it, about pronouncing her dead and letting her go. I didn't speak that thought out loud. I just looked at the clock, then at the patient's face, and spoke quietly to the team. 2 more cycles. There was no technical argument for continuing at that point. No medical justification written in any protocol. Maybe it was her age. Maybe because it was the middle of the night and I was tired of death. Maybe because I still remembered her saying, "Good night, doctor," the evening before. Her voice warm and human and alive. On the 27th minute, rhythm returned. Slow, weak, barely perceptible, but it returned. Carotid pulse present, pupils reactive to light, blood pressure climbing slightly with norepinephrine support, oxygen saturation re-establishing itself. We stabilized her condition, administered light sedation for containment, adjusted analgesia, provided ventilatory support, achieved acceptable parameters, and then silence filled the room like something heavy. I was ready to leave, to hand her over to the team for ongoing care when she opened her eyes. Just like that, out of nowhere, still intubated, pupils centered and focused. She didn't turn her head, didn't look around the room. She just opened her eyes and looked directly at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. It wasn't a look of pain or shock or confusion like we usually see in patients emerging from codes. It was direct, straight, firm, seeing something I couldn't understand. A tear rolled down her cheek without her blinking, without her breaking that unwavering gaze. I held her gaze for a few seconds, trying to read what was behind those eyes, what she was trying to tell me without words. Then I looked down to check the IV access, to adjust something on the infusion pump, anything to break that connection. No words were spoken. Nobody commented on what we'd all witnessed. The technician pulled the sheet up gently. The resident wiped the corner of her eye with gauze, a small gesture of tenderness in the clinical chaos. Nobody asked any questions. Nobody acknowledged what felt different about this moment. She continued with that fixed stare for a few more minutes, then closed her eyes again, as if the effort of seeing had exhausted her. Rhythm stable, parameters acceptable, tests ordered. And that was it. What remained in that room was only silence, heavy and uncomfortable, like we'd all witnessed something we couldn't name. She remained stable through the early morning hours. Ventilation adjusted, light sedation maintained, blood pressure held with minimal vasoactive drugs. The shift turned over like any other. Report delivered, responsibilities transferred. The resident was put in charge of monitoring her evolution. I stayed nearby, not because I needed to medically, but because I just did. Late afternoon, around 5 o'clock, she woke again. This time with more consciousness, more presence. She moved her eyes, tried to remove the breathing tube with her hands, fighting against the intervention that had saved her. The staff gently restrained her, explained her situation in calm voices. She was agitated but lucid. You could see the awareness in her eyes. She tried to speak, but couldn't with the tube blocking her vocal cords. She pointed to the side table, then to the technician's coat, then to the wall, until finally she made a gesture with her hand, like she was writing something urgent. They brought paper and pen, the hospital kind, blue ink, crooked cap, nothing fancy. She grabbed it with difficulty, her hand trembling violently from weakness and whatever she'd experienced during those 27 minutes. She pressed the tip to the paper, applied force, stopped, started again, wrote slowly, letters shaky, almost childlike, weak scratches forming words, 2 words and a period, then another sentence, more deliberate. She folded the paper, handed it to the resident with hands that shook like leaves. The resident read it, didn't say anything, just turned sideways and handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I read it twice, first to decipher the trembling handwriting, then to understand what was actually written, what she was trying to tell us. Thank you, but it wasn't you who was calling me. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. I put the paper in my pocket, didn't respond verbally. The patient kept watching me. She saw what I read. She saw what I understood, saw the confusion and discomfort cross my face. But we didn't exchange any look after that. Didn't acknowledge what those words meant. I made the final adjustments to her care, gave instructions to the team, requested imaging studies to check for any complications, reinforced support protocols, signed the medical record with a hand that felt heavier than usual, and left the room. In the following days, she improved steadily, weaned off sedation, was extubated without complications. Motor physical therapy showed good progress. She began eating normally, conversed like anyone recovering from critical illness, received visits from her daughter with smiles and reassurances, never mentioned the subject a single time. The staff commented that she was quiet, more withdrawn than usual, but not very different from other patients after intubation and a near-death experience. On the 9th day, she was discharged to the general ward, then sent home shortly after. She walked out on her own feet, smiling, said thank you to everyone, to me as well. But it wasn't the same tone, wasn't the same energy. That first thank you she wrote on the paper wasn't gratitude for saving her life. It was something else entirely, something I still don't fully understand. I never spoke about this with anyone, not even with the resident who handed me that folded paper. I threw the paper away the same day, crumpled it up and disposed of it like medical waste, or at least that's what I told myself I did. But even today, from time to time, it still comes back to my hand, not the paper itself, but the phrase, those words that refuse to fade. It wasn't you who was calling me. Have you ever felt that you interrupted something you weren't meant to interrupt? Brought someone back who wasn't meant to return? I know this doesn't go in medical charts, doesn't appear in official reports, doesn't enter the minds of most colleagues who would dismiss it as post-traumatic confusion or medication effects. But I know what I saw in that moment when she opened her eyes. She opened them like someone who had already said goodbye to this world, like someone who returned without having asked to come back. And that direct, firm, silent look wasn't meant for me as a person. It was looking through me at something beyond. It wasn't relief at being alive. It wasn't shock at what she'd experienced. It was as if she had come back against her own will, pulled from somewhere she'd already accepted going. Share in the comments your discovery, beginning with, I discover that, about moments when you witnessed something that defied medical explanation, something the charts couldn't capture. Writing this discovery isn't about supernatural beliefs. It's about acknowledging that consciousness and death hold mysteries we haven't begun to understand, that sometimes our interventions cross boundaries we can't see. If this also left you with that strange feeling that doesn't pass that uncomfortable sense, that medicine doesn't have all the answers, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what you think she meant by those words. What was calling her, if it wasn't me? What did she see in those 27 minutes when her heart had stopped and we fought to bring her back? I'll go straight to the point without wasting your time. In the hospital where I work, a state hospital in the interior of Minas Gerais, adult ICU, clinical sector, there's a landline phone that almost never rings. We have corporate cell phones, radios, emergency buttons, oxygen saturation alarms, bedside call bells, every modern communication technology you can imagine. But that phone in the small room attached to the infirmary, it's different, operates on a frequency all its own. It only rings when there's a big problem, when something terrible is about to happen. When it rings, everything stops. Whoever answers does so with a cold hand and a racing heart. There was one shift when I was alone, just one nursing technician who was lying on an improvised recliner in the corner, trying to rest during the quiet hours. It was early morning, a little past 3. The lights were dimmed low, that constant hum of the ventilator filling the air, infusion pumps beeping softly in their automated rhythms. Out of nowhere, the phone rang. A single ring was enough to freeze my blood. I woke the technician with my startled movement. I answered, hand trembling slightly. It was an elderly woman. Her voice was very measured, each word carefully placed. She seemed calm on the surface, but there was something that disturbed me deeply. I didn't know if it was the way she spoke or the silence between one word and another, like she was listening for something beyond our conversation. She simply asked, "Is my son still there? Bed 9. I checked the board, pulse quickening. Bed 9 was a critical patient, unstable but alive, hanging on by threads we couldn't see. Mechanical ventilation, dopamine at maximum dosage. I responded carefully. Yes, ma'am, he's here. He's unstable, but he's here. She only said thank you and hung up. No other questions, no request for details. 2 hours later, that patient went into cardiac arrest. We tried everything. Epinephrine, rhythm conversion, compressions, everything in our arsenal. But he didn't survive. It was end of life anyway. The situation had been very poor since admission, his body already making its choice. I didn't connect the dots immediately, didn't see the pattern forming. I just thought it was strange that this woman would call asking specifically about bed 9 at that exact moment. But life moves on in hospitals. We learn to swallow a lot of strange things in this environment, to compartmentalize what we can't explain. The following week, another shift. Same time, same situation. Early morning, everything calm, dim lighting, that tension that hangs in the air when nothing is happening, but it feels like something will. And the phone rang again. The moment I looked at it, I froze in place. It was the same sound, same tone, same feeling of dread. I answered, already knowing somehow. The voice was identical. "Is my son still there? Bed 9. It was a different patient now, admitted for severe respiratory insufficiency, post-COVID young guy, early 30s with his whole life ahead of him. I checked the data, took a deep breath, and spoke slowly. "Yes, he's here. He's unstable, but he's here." She thanked me and hung up the same way, without rush, without emotion, like she was checking off an item on an invisible list. Before the end of my shift, the patient went into collapse, bradycardia, multiple organ failure, the cascade we all recognize and dread. We tried to hold him, to pull him back from the edge. It didn't work. The same story repeating itself. Bed 9 was empty again, waiting for its next occupant. That's when I really started to feel disturbed, when coincidence began to look like something else. I went to the floor's telephone station, requested the call logs, expecting to find answers. There was nothing. According to the system, the phone hadn't received any calls at that hour, not in the 2 previous days, not during the early morning hours, nothing, no external numbers registered anywhere. The nursing technician who was with me looked at me strangely when I asked if she remembered the call. She only said quietly, like she was confessing something, "I remember the ring." But I thought it was an internal thing, some hospital system. The following early morning, 3rd week, new shift. I confess I arrived with a weight in my stomach, anxiety building. Bed 9 already had another patient, an elderly man with advanced cancer, stable until then. But we already knew he could deteriorate at any moment, that death was patient but inevitable. And at 3:08 a.m. the phone rang again, precise as a clock marking time towards something unavoidable. But this time, I answered differently. I didn't say hello, I spoke directly, cutting to what I knew was coming. "You want to know about Bed 9? It took about 3 seconds for the response to come, 3 seconds of silence that felt eternal. "Yes, doctor. It's just that he sometimes calls me." And she hung up, leaving me holding those words like broken glass. The phrase paralyzed me completely. I stood frozen with the phone in my hand, trying to process what she'd said, what it meant. One of the nurses who was in the ward looked at me with that expression that said, "It was her again, wasn't it?" But nobody said anything out loud. Nobody wanted to name what we were all beginning to suspect. After that 3rd call, I started to suspect this wasn't coincidence anymore, that something else was happening in Bed 9 that protocols couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone about it, didn't dare. We learned to separate things in medicine. What is science stays in our conduct, in our charts and procedures. The rest we swallow, we push down deep where it can't interfere with our work. But I'm methodical by nature. At the end of the shift, I waited for the sector to empty. I requested an administrative access password to review some old files, to trace this pattern back to its source. I went directly to the medical record of the patient who had stayed longest in that bed, the one whose presence seemed to linger. It was a young man in his early 20s. He'd been admitted with an infectious condition that later evolved into severe respiratory complications, a long hospitalization that stretched into weeks. They were weeks of struggle, of fighting for every breath. I wasn't at this hospital back then, but the complete history was all there in the digital records. What caught my attention was the companion field in the chart. There was only one name, Alzira Rodriguez, mother. The nursing notes said she came every single day without fail. She slept in the hospital, stayed in the plastic chair until dawn broke through the windows. She only left after the morning visiting hours ended. In his final week, his condition worsened dramatically, multiple organ failure, but he resisted longer than expected, his body refusing to surrender. He died in the same bed, Bed 9, with his mother somewhere in the building. 2 months later, there it was in the system. The mother was treated in the emergency room of the same hospital, sudden medical emergency, suspected stroke. She died in the waiting room before getting a spot in triage, before anyone could save her. On her chart, under address, it said, "No fixed residence," and under reason for hospital visit, seeking information about her son. That's when it became difficult to swallow this as coincidence, when the pattern became too clear to ignore. From that point on, every time I was assigned to the night shift, I made it a point to verify who was in bed 9. I even started noting it on a separate paper, keeping my own private log. Nobody knew about it. It was my thing, my investigation. There was a period when nobody occupied the bed. They renovated the monitor, changed the ventilator, a whole week with nobody there. And there were no calls. The phone remained silent. The following month, another patient entered in critical condition, victim of an accident, critical neurological status with poor prognosis. On his third night, the phone rang again, 3:12 a.m. Same ring, same tone, same feeling of inevitable dread. The technician who was resting sat up before I even moved. "It's her, isn't it?" I just looked at her and answered, already knowing what I would hear. The voice was identical, unchanged by time or death. "Is my son still there, bed 9? I said yes, and that the condition was grave, that we were doing everything we could. And she responded simply, "Thank you for taking care of him." Then she hung up, leaving me again with that hollow feeling. That day, the patient didn't die during my shift, but he had an arrest in the early morning hours. The next shift team tried to reverse it to bring him back. They couldn't. He became another name added to Bed 9's invisible list. I tried to find some practical explanation, something rational to hold on to. Similar voices, coincidence, someone from outside who knows the schedules and is monitoring somehow. But it was always exactly the same. Landline phone, 3 in the morning, external line supposedly blocked. Nobody could trace it, no calls registered anywhere in the system. I tried explaining it with electrical interference, with protocol variations, with statistical probability, but deep down, this woman just wants to know if her son is still there. What would you do if you received calls from someone who shouldn't be able to call anymore, asking about a place they can't let go of? And deep down, I think he never really left that bed, that some part of him remains tethered to bed 9, and she continues her vigil from wherever mothers go when they die, still searching for their children. Write in the comments a statement beginning with, "I feel that," about connections that transcend what we can measure medically, about love that doesn't end with death. Sharing this feeling isn't about believing in ghosts. It's about acknowledging that some bonds are so powerful they leave marks in places, in rooms, in beds, where suffering and devotion converged into something we don't have instruments to detect. My father's hospitalization was supposed to last 2 days, 3 at most. That's what they told us at the hospital, what we trusted would happen. He'd had a simple surgery, routine procedure, and was kept for observation only as protocol required. It was a regular hospital, the kind you find in medium-sized cities. Light blue facade, reception area with that smell of disinfectant mixing with fear. Television playing quietly in the waiting room. We always thought it was a safe place, somewhere that would care for him properly. It never crossed our minds that, well, I'll get to that part. On the afternoon of the second day, they called saying he had developed a fever. Nothing alarming, according to the person who spoke with me, their voice professionally neutral. They said it was expected in post-operative recovery, but as a precaution, they were moving him to the ICU, just to monitor better. Those were the exact words they used. I even thanked them for their attention, for being so careful. After that, information started becoming more distant, more carefully rationed. They said that for security reasons, visits were suspended, that it was an isolation protocol being implemented. But nobody explained to me what they were trying to isolate him from, what invisible threat required such measures. I asked if he was conscious, if he was aware of what was happening. They told me yes, but without much clarity, without details that would help me picture him. The voice on the other end of the line was quick, dry, a mixture of hurry and impatience that made me feel like an inconvenience. I called the next day, needing to hear his voice or at least hear something real about his condition. They answered with a prepared phrase that sounded rehearsed. He remains under observation, conditions stable within the context. I still remember those words, burned into my memory. Within the context. But nobody would tell me what the context was, what framework they were using to measure his stability. On the fourth day, that's when they called with news that shattered my world. They said he didn't make it, that he'd had a cardiorespiratory arrest, and that because of biological risk, the body would be delivered in a closed casket, sealed and final. That's when my mind entered a place I still can't fully explain, a space between grief and suspicion. I asked with all the calm I could gather to see my father's face one last time, to have that moment of final goodbye that every child deserves. They said it wasn't permitted, that the recommendation was to avoid any contact, that it was a protective measure being implemented for everyone's safety. But I keep asking myself, protection for who exactly? Protection from what? I tried to ask what caused his death, what killed him in just 4 days. They responded that it was an infectious complication, probably bacterial, they said vaguely, and cited a technical name I either forgot or perhaps never truly understood. Something like Acinetobacter, Klebsiella. I don't know anymore. The words blur together. I said I wanted the complete medical record, wanted to see everything documented. They said it was possible, but the process was formal, bureaucratic. It would take time, they warned. And again, they emphasized that it wouldn't change the funeral procedures, wouldn't open that casket. My mother couldn't handle going to the burial, couldn't face putting something in the ground that she'd never seen. I went, arriving early before anyone else. The casket was already there, closed and sealed, with his name on a white label like a package being shipped. Everything happened so fast, so dry and clinical. The sensation was that I was there to sign a receipt, not to say goodbye to someone I loved, someone who raised me. There were people from the hospital at the wake, maintaining their institutional presence. One person from the staff appeared briefly, didn't look at me much, said they were sorry that the hospital had followed all protocols. And then nothing, no long looks, no explanation that made any real sense. That's when I realized that their silence spoke much louder than any words could have, that I had lost my father twice. Once in the ICU, and again in the doubt they left in place of his body, in place of answers. About 2 months later, I took my mother to an appointment at the same hospital, returning to the scene of our unanswered questions. It was routine medical care, but we almost gave up on going. We only went because it was the only place that had availability that month, the only option in our limited healthcare system. She didn't want to go back there either. She didn't say it explicitly, but I saw it in her eyes, in the way she moved through those corridors. While she waited to be called, I went to the ground floor to get coffee, needing something to do with my hands. The same corridor, the same smell of disinfectant and institutional dysfunction. It gave me a tightness in my chest that I didn't know where to store, what to do with. It was there, in that common area, that I encountered an elderly woman my aunt knew. She recognized me, started a conversation, spoke about my father with sympathy, said she was so sorry. And then she commented quietly, looking around nervously, that her husband had also died there on the same floor, in the same month, and that his body was also delivered without being able to be viewed. She said with exact words that mirrored my own experience. They said it was protocol, but they never explained it properly. That phrase hit me like an uncomfortable repetition, an echo of my own trauma. The same justification, the same outcome, the same absence of real answers. I asked carefully if she ever found out what her husband had, what killed him. She said they gave a difficult name, something she didn't write down or couldn't remember. It sounded like a bacteria name, she said, the same vague technical explanation. From that point on, I stopped trying to understand and started trying to forget, but I couldn't manage it, because it's not just the loss itself. It's the manner in which it happened, the questions left unanswered. It's the hole left not by a response, but by the lack of one, by institutional silence that feels like conspiracy. I thought about filing a complaint, about demanding the complete medical record, about making noise until someone listened. But I knew that even if it came, it would arrive with the same technical words, the same rigid phrases, and nothing that would bring peace to my heart or my mother's. It's just that some things die with the person, but some things continue haunting those who remain behind. I see many people talking about grief, about farewell, about acceptance and moving forward. But nobody talks about what happens when you don't even have the chance to see if it was really who they said it was. When you're asked to trust the protocol, but the protocol seems more like a veil than an explanation, more like a cover-up than transparency. Sometimes I think my father is still there, trapped somehow. No, truthfully, I know he's not, but in a file somewhere, in a report that nobody will ever open again, in a wing that perhaps continues receiving patients without anyone knowing what happened to the previous ones, to the ones who came before and were sealed away. The last image I have of him is the gurney entering the room 2 days before the fever started, before everything changed. After that, what I received was a phone call and a closed casket, a box I was forbidden to open. If there was an error, if there was omission, if everything happened exactly as they said it did, I don't know, and perhaps I never will know the truth. But what they delivered to me wasn't just a sealed body. It was a silence, heavy and suffocating. A silence that sticks to you in a way that not even time can wash away, that follows you through years and dreams and moments when you should be at peace. My father left home walking on his own feet, talking about recovery and coming home soon. And he came back in a casket that nobody was allowed to open, that held secrets along with whatever remained of him.